Joining on. Just for the sake of time, we're not going to have a chance to have folks introduce themselves, but if you want to write in the chat where you're from and who you are, we'd love to welcome you to this conversation. We will begin in just a minute. Again, just really excited and grateful that you have joined us. And if you are not here to talk about courage and bravery, then you may be in the wrong place, but I think everyone is in the right place. Welcome, everyone. It's a real joy just to see all of your names and so many places from all across the country and even the world. So again, welcome, everyone. So I was half joking with Bishop Budde in our pre-conversation here that there are very few things that I would come off vacation for, but this is one of them. Both of us are actually on vacation, but we really wanted to still have this conversation because it is so timely. We are going to be reflecting together, discerning together about what courage looks like, what courage means in a time when it feels like it is so urgently needed. And in some cases feels like it's in short supply. Although I think we're going to be able to reflect on many of the glimpses of courage, and in some cases, the full expressions of courage that we're seeing in our midst. We want to ground this conversation in our faith. As many of you know, Sojourners is an organization that for over 50 years has been committed to articulating the biblical call to justice. And to do that in a way that inspires Christians of all traditions, working with people of other faith traditions, to put their faith into action for justice and peace, hopefully, prayerfully, in courageous ways. And we're going to be able to talk about some of that work. I can't think of a better conversational partner in this than Bishop Mariann Budde. She's someone I've admired for a long time. I'm grateful that I've gotten to know her in a number of different capacities. And so we are going to learn a lot and be edified by both her experience and her wisdom, and by the ways in which she has very much lived out a commitment to courage. Mariann Budde serves as the spiritual leader for the congregations and Episcopal schools in the District of Columbia and 4 Maryland counties that comprise the Episcopal Diocese of Washington. She is the first woman elected to this position, and also serves as the chair of the Protestant Episcopal Cathedral Foundation, which stewards the ministries of the Washington National Cathedral and Cathedral Schools. I'm particularly grateful for that part of her role because it really impacts my sons. She is a passionate believer in the gospel of Jesus and the Episcopal Church's particular witness. She's committed to the spiritual and numerical growth of congregations and developing new expressions of Christian community. And I'm not going to read all of her accomplishments and her full bio, but I just want to emphasize this last part. I love the way this is written. She cherishes her friendship with interfaith leaders in the Washington metro area and their joint endeavors in service to the common good. Bishop Budde, welcome to this conversation. You're no stranger to Sojourners, and you've got a lot of our supporters from all across the country, our readers, many of our advocates, and they are excited to be with you to have this conversation about courage. And so I wanted to start out with a question that will hopefully kind of get us into this important topic. And I should emphasize that, one of the things we want to talk about is your book, We Can Be Brave, which certainly talks a lot about courage. And so I'm kind of curious, what inspired you? What led you to write this book at this particular time in your ministry, international life? And then, maybe kind of tied to that, how do you define courage in this book? You're on mute, unfortunately.
First of all, let me simply acknowledge what a gift it is for me to be with you personally, Adam. You and I show up in common spaces a lot, and I'm always grateful when we are standing side by side, usually in endeavor for the common good in the Washington metro region or beyond, and also for the Ministry of Sojourners, which has been a mainstay of my spiritual and vocational life since I was in my 20s. And so thank you. And thanks to all who have tuned in for today. I was inspired to write a deeper reflection about courage. By the way, are you hearing that background noise that I'm hearing? Is that, I'm just wondering if others are hearing that as well. Rick, are you hearing? Okay, okay.
Okay, that might be, full disclosure, I am in a coffee shop and there's a little bit of conversation in the background. So I'm
Okay.
gonna try to move somewhere else, but go ahead, keep talking and
Okay,
we'll
and
try
that's
to get
fine.
it.
I'll just plow on through. I'm used to that. You know, I preach often with congregations full of children, so talking over people is part of the trade. So back to your question, I was honored to have the opportunity to reflect in a book form on a theme that has been close to my heart for all of my ordained life. We all want to be brave in the moments when it counts. We want to show up when things matter to us. We want to be the person that can step in. And every once in a while, to our absolute astonishment, we do. We're the ones. And I wanted to reflect not only on those decisive moments, but to widen the camera lens and to think of the ways that that invitation to courage shows up in our lives writ large. And so the bulk of our life is not lived under the lights of the public eye. The bulk of our life is lived in the circles of community and family where we find ourselves. And every day, it seems, or nearly every day, we're given the opportunities to cross a threshold, to do something we've never done before, to show up in a way that is costly to us and yet important. And so I wanted to reflect on that. And so many of the examples that I chose to write about aren't the big heroic examples, but the smaller ones, the ones that lead to a life attuned to what it feels like when we're invited to step into a space that is either unfamiliar, that's a little frightening, or that is absolutely what seems beyond our capacity. And so I often think of Eleanor Roosevelt's definition that courage is to do the things that you think you cannot do. And I don't know about you, but most of the things that I would define as my defining moments of courage, I originally thought that they were impossible for me to do. And so I took it all the way back to my childhood, to my adolescence, because I'm persuaded that many of our defining moments happen when we're very young. It's certainly true for me, and it's true for the people that I admire. And so I really thought back on some of the times when I felt like, okay, as a teenager, something happened and I needed to step into those moments. But as I was thinking about it later on, and when the opportunity came up, being a parent and now a grandparent, I realized, you know what? Little kids and certainly teenagers are called upon all the time to do something they've never done before, or they're thrust into circumstances that require of them great courage. And so I was thrilled to be able to extend the reflection to think about how in childhood we cross thresholds every day, how as young people we are thrust into the world, either writ large or in our families, that ask us to do big things, and that we learn through those experiences. We learn a lot about courage by attempting to be brave or attempting things and failing. We learn by practice. We learn by watching other people. And every once in a while, We're called upon to do something, and as we look back on that moment, we realize, you know what, we've been preparing for them for a very long time.
Thank you. That's a perfect way to begin. And I know this is probably on the minds and hearts of a lot of the people that are listening, but certainly one of the defining moments of courage for you, I would
Right,
imagine, was the sermon that you gave after the second inauguration of
right,
President Trump.
right.
And I would love for you to just share a little bit about what that moment meant for you. What did it feel like? What
Right.
what inspired you to share a message, really what I would kind of say was a plea to the president to show compassion
Yeah.
to immigrants, to those that are trans and within the LGBTQ community. And I want to emphasize one thing though in this question, which is that some of the quote unquote controversy around that sermon or the reaction to that sermon overshadowed the majority of your sermon message, which
Right.
was really a message about unity, not kind of a
Yep.
superficial unity, but a
Right.
deeper unity, kind of a we are one body of Christ kind of unity, right? That was extended even beyond the Christian
Right.
community.
Right.
So yeah, I just loved it for you to kind of reflect with us. What inspired you to kind of share that plea, and how do you think that reflected a moment of courage?
Mhm. Well, one of the important things to know about that sermon is that I had a lot of time to think about it because the dean of the cathedral had, through a lot of consultation and reflection on his part, made the decision well before the results of the election, like back in June when we were still in the heat of the political season, the campaigning, that no matter who was elected, there would be a prayer service at Washington National Cathedral. The cathedral was completely in charge. It was not going to be given over to the inaugural committee to plan. It would be a prayer for healing, prayer service for healing and for unity in the nation. It would be the same service no matter who won, and no matter who won, the Bishop of the Diocese of Washington would be offering the sermon. So I had that, like it was in my head for a very long time. And also something important to know is that when Trump was elected the first time, we had a prayer service for him in the cathedral, or not for him, but for the country, the day after the inauguration, as we've done for presidents since Truman, or since Roosevelt, actually. But that in those years, the inaugural committee was really at the helm, and they opted not to have a homily, which we were relieved about because we weren't sure who they were going to put in the pulpit. But afterwards, someone said to me, "Oh, but you missed an opportunity, Bishop. You should have written an op-ed to put in the local paper what you would have said if you had been the sermon preacher," right? He said that to me like that was 8 years ago. And I remember at the time thinking, oh my God, he's right. And I have no idea what I would say. So I've been thinking about this. It's been in the back of my head for a long time. And as you said before, I spent most of my time, even when I knew the president who was going to be elected, and when we learned he was going to come, because we weren't sure he would come to the service because he likes, to have things in control. I wanted to talk about what are the pillars of unity. What do we need to have in this country if we are going to be a unified, if we're going to have any semblance of unity across disagreement, across partisanship, across the divisions that so define our body politic. And I shopped it around. I wasn't going to do this on my own. The final piece about mercy came at the very end, and it started out in conversation, actually with Adam Hamilton, who is now a candidate for Senate in Kansas, and he was a conversation partner for me. And he said, I think there's a fourth. I wonder if there isn't a fourth pillar. And he was wondering if it was maybe compassion or empathy, and we landed on the biblical notion of mercy. And he just said, just think about it. And then I was listening on the day of the inauguration to the president and those surrounding him. And I realized, he's doubling down on the very rhetoric of division and of dehumanization that he based his campaign upon. There was no attempt to bring us together as a country. And in particular, he was going after immigrants and members of the LGBTQ community, and particularly trans people. And I thought, you know what? There are people in this country who are terrified that they don't fit into this vision. They don't belong here anymore, and nobody's talking about it. On that day, no one was giving any, and that's when I said, okay, I'm going to try this. And I suppose I just want to say that as someone who gives sermons, and I think you know this from your experience, once you've decided what you're going to say, um, what you feel about it or what's going on, it's like you're either going to do it or you're not. But feelings at that point aren't the most important data point. So was I nervous? Yes, I was nervous. Was I thinking about the reaction? Sure, but that wasn't. I was, and then the response was what it was. So after a while, my feelings, you were asking about feelings, I'd sort of disconnect from them because I couldn't have done it if I was thinking too much about how I was feeling, if that makes sense.
No, it does. It makes a lot of sense. And I think I want to go back to one of the things you said earlier, that courage, these are my words, but I'm hopefully
Yeah,
building on what you said, is like a muscle that you build, right?
it is. It's actually,
And
yes, it's almost muscle memory,
right,
and that, in one chapter, I talk about that in my book. It's like stepping up to the plate. A baseball player isn't thinking about much when the ball is coming over the plate, right? They're just swinging. And there is something about courage that takes practice and is a muscle. So, absolutely.
so I, building on that, I mean, it also strikes me that from a Christian point of view, courage is a spiritual discipline. And I'd love to have you reflect on that if you think it is in fact a spiritual discipline. And one of the things that strikes me, so I chose this background intentionally.
Yeah.
As you know, I've been very much inspired by the civil rights movement. To me,
Yeah.
that is kind of the epitome of courage, courageous acts, often inspired by faith, right? The Black church in particular, but also many Jewish leaders and others were kind of the engine and the anchor of the civil rights movement.
Mhm.
And on the one hand, that can be really inspiring, of course, when we think about the sacrifice and the courage to face hoses and dogs and jail time. But that sets a pretty high bar in some ways. And maybe, not just maybe, I think in some ways, in responding to this increasingly authoritarian style moment that we're in, we need to be thinking that high. But to build the muscle to get there for many of us, it does take many of those smaller, but still really significant acts of courage. And so I guess my question really is like, how do we build that muscle? And how does that connect to our faith?
I think about it a lot. And one of the ways that the courage muscle, if you will, same as the hope muscle, to build it isn't, for me, speaking personally for me, it's important for me not to divorce those public expressions from the rest of my life, right? And so how I relate to my community, my family, my church community, my team at work, that I'm the same person showing up in all of those places. And so the practices aren't necessarily siphoned off into given areas, but form a life, right? And so I feel that one of the ways we practice courage is by committing ourselves to live lives of honesty, self awareness, and reflection on how we show up in the world, right? And so sometimes that may mean not doing what I want to do on my day off so that I can be somewhere present where I can, where I can serve or be committed somewhere. Other days it might mean sitting at a hospital bed where I'm really terrified of what's happening, or maybe I'm just bored out of my mind because the person I'm there, you know what I mean? Like just making these practices, and so there is this sense of a readiness to be available, and also practiced in reflecting on how I am intimidated or fearful in the response of behaviors or reactions that are unpleasant for me, right? Like one of the things you have to become comfortable with or accepting of is discomfort, right? So how do I show up in the world where I'm willing to make myself uncomfortable for the sake of something that's important? And that can be on any level at all, but it translates into those moments when you are called upon to do something that may have a larger impact than a lot of the smaller moments, or at least seem to, if that makes sense. And so there's just a, and I don't want to say daily because I'm not sure it happens daily, but a regular attentiveness to the ways we're called upon to show up in the world, however that's defined for us. I had to have a conversation with my son the other day, and we're here with our family, and it was a hard conversation. It wasn't a conflict situation, but we were just talking about some really tender things, and I had to decide before we had the conversation if I was even going to have the conversation. I could have let it go, right? And it probably would have been okay if I had let it go, but I'm so glad I didn't, because we had a different kind of conversation, and he's in his late 30s now, and I'm in my mid 60s, and it's like, okay, we just had a very different conversation, and that will stay with me, as a practice. Yeah.
I talked a little bit at the beginning that, this is a kind of crisis moment that we're in, and there's different ways to define that crisis. Crisis of democracy, crisis of how we show up for our neighbors and who is being targeted and harmed by many of the policies we see. It's also a crisis of polarization, that we are so bitterly divided, and that in many respects, there are many Americans that not only distrust people of a different political persuasion, but literally say that they have contempt for those that are of a different political perspective or persuasion or affiliation. And so, at least from my vantage point, I think there's a strong connection between being courageous and really embracing love of neighbor.
Embracing, I'm sorry, I didn't
Love
hear
of,
that.
yeah, love of
Love
neighbor.
of neighbor, yes,
Right.
yes. Yeah.
And one kind of profile of courage that we saw over this past year was the degree of courage in Minneapolis,
Yeah.
your home, right? And we
Yeah.
actually ran into each other one of those times, right?
Yes, we did.
Just before a major mobilization on the coldest day that I've ever experienced in my lifetime, 20 below zero, and thousands
Right.
of people were
Yep.
willing to march together and protest together in order to show up for their neighbors, essentially, love of neighbor. And so I'd love for you to kind of reflect on what you saw in Minneapolis as a potential example of courage. And what do you think that can teach us as we think ahead to some of what might be necessary for us as people of faith going forward?
Right. Well, it was extraordinary. And I think one of the things I took away, speaking to a whole bunch of people, not only the organizers of the events that you and I were a part of, but family, neighbors, members of the church that I served for years, is that not everybody did the same thing, right? There wasn't like Here are the four things you must do if you are going to be part of this movement of response, in response to the real danger that was being thrust upon the majority of immigrants in 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 the Twin Cities and beyond. And so people had a number of different pathways. And for some, it was a personal relationship that they wanted to protect. And so children who were their neighbors, literally their neighbors, or who attended the same preschool as their children did, wanted to make sure that those children were safe. Others were making sure that there was enough food in the homes were people who were afraid to go out. And there was this whole network of mutual aid societies that have been in place for a long time that were activated, and other churches that jumped into this work. But they had, as you were talking, they had some muscles already built up, but they just went into this massive food distribution program. There were the labor organizers and the church leaders and faith leaders who issued the call for, the mass presence in the streets, right? And people showed up for that. So I guess one of the things that, and if you were talking to the organizers on the outside, it looked like it was coordinated and it was smooth, but you know enough about what these things are like on the inside. It was slightly controlled chaos the entire time. And oh, by the way, it was really cold. And so, there's just all this energy, but there was that. And we were all graced with, and this doesn't happen with every movement, we were all graced for a time of a sense of the rightness of it. And so there were, suddenly there were neighborhoods where there weren't any immigrants at all that were lighting candles on street corners, so that entire major roadways had candlelit services all the way through. And then, of course, when Alex Preddy and Renee Good were killed, there was a whole other level. But by that time, people were practiced. I would say one of the things we learned from it is that you never know when you're going to be part of something that gets big really fast. Most of the time when we do things like this, when we show up either, as you and I know very well, we show up for public presence, or it's really small and not many people are paying attention, but you do it anyway because you feel like it's the right thing to do. And every once in a while, you're blessed with something that takes on a larger life. And I would say that not all, but some of the events of the civil rights movement had that quality to it. Like, there was a lot of organizing and there was a lot of effort, but then something bigger happened. And something bigger happened in the Twin Cities. And it has had a strengthening effect across the country, where it's not ever, and also ICE changed its tactics, where the resistance has to continue, but it's not going to be in the same way, right? We have to adapt to the circumstances. But one of the things that we took away from that is that people in a community need to be given lots of different ways to be able to show up to love their neighbor. And when they have those, they do. By and large, they do. And we're certainly experiencing that in Washington. It's not nearly as big and public, but the number of people, state Episcopalians from way out far away from where most of the immigrant populations are showing up to be accompanying in court hearings and providing food and making sure that people are not alone when they go to their, when they need to go places where they're, hospital appointments and things. So I feel it was an example of what it looks like when grace and humankind come together, and it's an encouragement to keep going. And like the civil rights movement, the work never ends, right? This is an unfinished symphony, and we're going to just have to keep on going for a really long time.
Beautifully said. I really feel like I saw real glimpses of beloved community in the Twin Cities.
Yeah.
And I really think it was a reflection moment in this kind of context of what, many kind of experts call authoritarian consolidation. It
Mhm.
really helped to disrupt that and show
think
the
so.
power of people
Right.
and of people across different sectors and pillars of society that all were willing to show solidarity and to
Yeah.
sacrifice. I mean, you had, as you know, business leaders that small businesses shut down. I've
They
never
did.
seen two cities where there wasn't practically a single business that was open.
Right.
Schools decided not to be in session. And
Right.
so it really was this kind of across the board mobilization. And I think it's a glimpse of some of what we might need in the future and evidence of what is possible. So
Right.
I am certainly grateful. And there's, some of you may know this, but many of the same folks that were on the kind of cutting edge of organizing so much of that work in Minneapolis, from labor to immigrant rights organizations to faith organizations, are convening a major convergence on democracy at the end of this month. And
Mm.
there are going to be leaders from all across the country that are coming to that. I'll be there to really not just learn what was done, but then to kind of think about how that applies to this upcoming midterm election and what needs to be done to ensure that we have a free, fair, and safe election, and that we can have a strategy in the event that there really is a concerted effort to try to undermine the integrity of the election or to
Sure.
deny the results. And so just kind of mentioning that as something very concrete that's come out of this whole
Very
process.
concrete.
Yeah.
And again, not for me. I mean, there's a lot of curiosity for me because um, for some, the path is um, these sort of public expressions of resistance, right? That's a real path. Others will choose a quieter path. Others will choose a service path. Others, I guess I find I'm just so deeply struck by how when you look at a movement writ large, and the nice thing about, and by the way, in Minnesota, I can tell you it's not over, right? It's not over. There are people who are still suffering tremendously. People are still being detained, right? It's not like that. So, but it does. So there is this. There's like these big moments, and then there's the after effect, which is a little bit of a letdown and exhaustion, right? Everybody's just exhausted. And then a slow picking up and living according to the vision, like you were saying, of beloved community that they saw. And so our neighbor here in Minnesota is one of the organizers. She's a rabbi, and she and her little, I mean, very small rabbinic Jewish community, partnering with an equally small Lutheran congregation, they raised like over $3 million for rent assistance because of so many people who couldn't pay their rent because they couldn't go to their jobs, right? So I mean, I just like this ongoing network of support. And then we'll see how it translates into electoral politics. We're seeing, we're getting the results of midterms here in Minnesota. That was a pretty big night in the Midwest last night. And so just some interesting things that we're learning about, okay, what does the future look like? And I've been thinking a lot about how we're going to rebuild after this political tsunami finally passes, right? And what are the muscles we need to have in place now so that we can pick up when this is over, when this particular nightmare is over.
Thank you, Bishop. We're going to transition to some questions.
Okay.
Selfishly, I could talk to you for hours.
I know, but
but we have other chances to talk.
Thank
for
you,
sure.
everyone, for listening, and I look
Yeah.
forward to hearing from all of you.
So I want to introduce and thank my colleague Rick, who has helped pull this together. He is going to just share really quickly how we're going to do questions. As we transition, I just want to build on the last thing you said. I mean, I'm reminded of the Apostle Paul, who in 1 Corinthians, as he's writing to the Corinthian church, described us as one body with many parts. And he
Right.
described us as having different spiritual gifts. And one of the things that also was so striking about Minneapolis, and don't Don't forget about St. Paul. It's the Twin
It
Cities,
was in,
right? My brother lives in St. Paul, right?
It was
It's right.
St. Paul too.
Yeah. But just the incredible infrastructure and outpouring of mutual aid that played
Yes.
such a key role. So again, not everyone had to be on the front lines of protesting. There are many people that were literally serving their neighbors by ensuring they had food and access to food. They were walking their neighbors' kids to school because
Right.
their kids were fearful. So like there's so many different expressions of this that we have to find our own specific call in this moment,
Right.
right?
And one of the things that the organizers here would also tell us is that, you know, after George Floyd's murder, things really changed
Yeah,
in
that's right.
Minnesota. And some of those networks were really strengthened and deepened then. There were
Yeah.
also some important conversations across real differences that began to happen on a local level, both within church and faith communities and also in neighborhoods. Mutual aid societies were strengthened. There have been other tragedies. I mean, there was a school shooting last year, this time last year in Minneapolis. So there have been these crises moments where people on a very local level had become accustomed to stepping up because they wanted to be loving to their neighbor. And so I think what was just so stunning about this particular time is that it was in response to an attack from the federal government, right? And going back to your point of like, okay, this is a symbol of what can happen in in the times we're in now. And so I feel like, you know, there's a pretty big gulp factor for that right now. Yeah.
Absolutely. Rick,
Thanks so much, Adam. What an amazing conversation. I'm sorry we only have 7 or 8 minutes left. So if it's okay, I'll just relay a couple of the questions that have come in from Q&A. And let me start with one, the practical question that I think a lot of people are asking. This is from Nancy, who says, in addition to communicating with my congressional representatives, how else can I, as an 85-year-old woman, how can I show courage and work to influence change in this presidency?
I want to thank you for your question and your courage. The best counsel I have ever received and that I am happy to pass on is to look close in, right? To start where our natural connections are. And so to look around your community, your neighborhood, your family, and not to imagine that there's some big task way out on the horizon that is yours or mine, but to begin with the things that are closest to us. And we never know what might have that ripple effect for the greater body politic. And so, first of all, I want to thank you for staying engaged politically. Be sure, all of us, to get out and vote, but also to pay attention to the opportunities that God gives you in your immediate circle, and to continue there.
Thanks so much, Bishop Budde. I'm going to combine two questions because they're very similar, and I want to give folks a chance to have their voice heard as much as possible. So Richard asks us, what does the current extensive evangelical support for Trump say about the current state of Christianity at this time? And from Terry, what would be effective to counter some of the Christian nationalism that influences decisions and makes it more difficult for us to be courageous at this time?
Right. Both really important questions. I think the one thing I would just remind us all is that it is not new for Christians to be represented across the spectrum of political and social conviction in our nation. This goes back all the way to the beginning. And so there are times when there is a sort of a Christian alliance with a rise of authoritarianism or other forms of anti-democratic sentiment. So we might learn from those examples historically. But I would say that the best antidote to what we are seeing is authentic Christian living and authentic Christian witness. And it's slower going right now. We don't have the same microphones or the same amount of financial support as some do on the what we might call the Christian right, or the Christian nationalist movement. But I have to believe that there is no other antidote than to be as authentically Christian as we can be. Not only in serving the poor and standing up for truth as we understand it, but also loving our political adversaries and refusing to treat them with contempt. I don't know, Adam, if you have anything you want to add to that, but that's my thoughts on that.
No, it's beautifully said. I mean, I think particularly in a current body politic, Jesus' command that we love our enemies is a pretty essential commitment.
Pretty central right now.
Pretty essential right now.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's a way in which we can work to politically defeat those that are harming most vulnerable, those that are attacking our democracy, without villainizing or demonizing many people that may be supporting that agenda. And it's hard. If it was easy, we wouldn't be where we are, right? But again, that's where courage comes in.
Right. Thank you.
I'm sorry to say that this will have to be the last question for our session. We have over 650 people registered, so you can imagine the number of questions that have come in are voluminous. We'll make sure to get those questions to you so future sessions can address them. But let me end on a last question from Chi-Chi, who says, I'll be honest, it's still scary for most people, Christians, kind people, to do accompaniment of immigrants and detainees and other marginalized peoples. And yet it seems so important to do, to signify our values, to take prophetic action, and also to replenish the ranks of those who are exhausted by having done accompaniment for months now.
Yeah.
What is your message of hope and of encouragement to be courageous at this very difficult time as we prepare for the long haul and not just, again, short-term responses to things that are going on that our faith calls us to try to address?
Well, Chi-Chi, first of all, thank you for your willingness to step into that very poignant and important space and frightening space. I feel that courage is contagious. It is communal. One person's actions inspires another's, and inviting people to come along. I went on my first accompaniment because I was invited to by someone who said, I'd like you to just see what it's like. And it was unnerving, but it was also really touching on a level that was deeply personal for me. And so perhaps one of the things that we can do is, if you are doing that work, is to pray about the people we can invite to join us, and not necessarily for a huge commitment, but for one step, and to demystify or to embolden those who might not ever do it on their own, but if they are willing, if they see us and we invite them to join us, they might come along. But again, thank you to all of you who are listening, who have been doing some version of that accompanying ministry. It means so much.
Adam, we'll hand it back to you for the wrap up.
Thanks, Rick. Well, I see a lot of hearts already in the chat. Bishop Budde, I just want to thank you for being courageous, not just in the moment in the National Cathedral, but throughout your ministry and career. I'm really grateful that Sojourners has been able to partner with the Episcopal Church in so many different ways, including around a program to ensure everyone's freedom to vote is protected in this next election.
Yes.
If any of you that are watching, listening in, want to learn more about our work, please check it out. Check us out at sojo.net. We also have kind of an action arm in addition to our publication arm, and would love to find ways to work together to not only defend and transform our democracy, but ultimately to build beloved community. I really believe that the sermon that you gave gave license and inspiration for a lot of faith leaders around the country to speak more boldly, to preach more boldly in this moment, to preach and teach more courageously in this moment. And I just, I know sometimes it can sound trite that courage is contagious, but I really believe that is true.
Well, I know it
we
is. I have to.
need- Yeah.
I'm going to say real quickly, I know it is because I was inspired by other people who did it before me, right? So, I mean,
that's
I
right.
was inspired by the Roman Catholic bishops who just months before that had spoken out very powerfully. And I thought, okay, that, so we it's like a baton that we pass on to each other.
right.
And so now let's keep on doing that good work. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I just think that's
No.
just
I'm
so
glad you did. I'm
important.
glad you did. Well, so my little benediction is, let us leave this virtual conversation committed to making courage more contagious.
Amen.
Amen.
Well, and thanks to you and all the Sojourners community for the good and faithful work that you do. I'm honored to stand among and beside you.
Thank you, Bishop Budde.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone. Bless
Thank
you.
Thank you, everyone.